welcome back to another episode of Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. I'm your host, Sayan, as most of you would know, and on this show, we keep mental wellness very real, grounded, and practical in everyday life. There's a quiet conversation happening in homes all over the world right now. And as a father who have a son or a daughter and a screen, I think the screen is winning because we have been kind of told that this is a tech problem, maybe a willpower problem, but underneath that, the people who actually sit with families when the damage shows up will tell you something different. And maybe, maybe it's a fatherhood problem. And it's not unfixable because today's guest has spent his life in the places where this gets real. My guest today is Doug Moore. Doug brings a combination of perspective that you don't really find in one person because he he's a former wilderness trail guide, a former youth pastor, a practicing registered nurse, and a trained sexual assault nurse examiner. He's also the author of the Vanguard Project, which is equipping fathers to fight for their sons, released in March 2026, which has been called the book that fathers didn't know that they needed it until it was in their hands. So today, I invite you all to join me on this conversation where we would actually look at the harder aspects of what really parenting asks of us. So, Doug, welcome to the show. I think this is a much needed one. So, I'm glad that you're here for this today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Doug. So, before we go deeper, start with any kind of cultural practice or anything at all, I want to put forth a disclaimer for all the listeners that some statements may reflect personal belief and experiences and are presented as individual views and not medical advice. Listeners should consult qualified professionals for medical conditions. So, Doug, before we go any deeper, I would love to start at point zero because across the wilderness, the church, hospital, you have sat across a lot of boys and a lot of men in their hardest moments. So, when you think about that, I mean, what made the difference for the ones who came back from the edge? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Not any kind of framework or strategy wise, but you know what really comes from within.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest struggles, as you've already alluded to, is the way our digital devices have a grasp and a hold on us. And many of us, whether it's in our career or things that we do in life, are tethered to devices. And so I think it is hard, if you talk about addiction and ways that I think a lot of people get into this because they're finding a way to, let me use the word numb out from things that are going on in life. So, one of the things that I really lean on from my wilderness training and even being a trained sexual assault nurse examiner is really finding a way to connect with things outside of a screen. And that's really not 100% the theme of the book, but it is where the book lands. Or what we're doing is we're really trying to give people a way to step away from the device and let them know that there's more. I mean, it's ironic that you and I are using digital devices for this, but I think this is a necessity. This is the way we're communicating. But I think,
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of the things I really encourage dads and sons to do is just to get dirt under the fingernails.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm gonna take a very diplomatic position, right? Because I totally 100% agree with you because I think there could be more potentially more bad use cases of a digital device than good cases, right? And that really depends on who is using it. Because as a teenager or a kid, you really haven't formed that understanding of what's right for you or what's wrong, right? You do what feels tempting to you, okay? And that's where addiction like digital addiction or pornography addiction comes into place. So I think there's a really common idea right now that these things like digital addiction or pornography are mostly a content problem. But maybe block the right sites, buy the right app, and that government should have uh, you know, uh, a place as well. I mean, if you look at China, for example, they banned apps like all. I mean, all. Uh, Western apps like YouTube or yeah, what was the other one? Sorry, I forgot. So I believe they don't even use Instagram in that case, right? They have built their own apps in which media and content is heavily regulated, right? And
Mm.
I mean, it's kind of a weird statement, but I believe it has its own pros in that content. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. But yeah, coming back to the actual question. So from everything that you've actually seen, where does that framing usually fall apart? You know, what are most of the parents missing about what's really happening to their kids, and why just cutting off the content or the device or whatever it is, the apps is or might not be the right thing.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the biggest thing we need to do as parents first is examine how we're consuming media and how we engage with our children. I don't know if you experience this, but where I live, there's times where parents are their kids are just screaming for attention, but parents are busy scrolling. So I think kids are smart. I mean, you and I know you probably sound like you've been around technology for a while, and so have I, and we can find ways around filters, everything. Relationship is where it really lands. Being able to have the conversations with our children and it being I like to call it a no shame game, which means we have experienced this. I say that our scars, they don't disqualify us from being able to speak to our children about this. So where we really land on this, we can have all the filters, but we want to have authentic conversations with our kids. That's one of the things I'm trying to really do is I have a script where dads can have conversations or moms and help them. It's on ramp. How do we start the conversation? Because kids are not going to be like, "Hey, so little Johnny or Susie, are you looking at porn?" And they'll be like, "No, I'm not looking at porn," but a very disarming conversation. And I don't know. I think we do have a vast responsibility as parents. Yeah, I don't disagree that um, governments can have influence in these, especially where it's involving like sex trafficking and those type of things. But I think the front lines of this is going to be in our homes and being willing to take that hard step. That's the hard behind the word vanguard. Vanguard is someone that leads and willing to step ahead and um, you know, show the way. I think performative fatherhood is exhausting. So because the audience never claps, but responsible fatherhood is quieter and it's the one a kid actually feels. So our kids don't want perfect parents; they just need a present one.
Yeah,
Hopefully, that
that
answers your question.
yeah, no, that lands. I love the way you summed it up, and I think yeah, I mean that reframes matter so much on this because the conversation right now is mostly about the tools, but uh one would think, but what you're naming is something even more deeper. You know, the tools indeed do matter, and yeah, I mean, we as adults know how to navigate through all of that, but they're not the medicine from a child's perspective, right? I mean, the relationship is. So if we stay with that for a few moments, Doug, underneath the screen time, underneath the addiction, late nights, and closed bedroom doors, there's something deeper happening to the mental state of a boy. So this question is particularly to all the parents so that they understand the nuance or I mean the nuances and the nitty-gritty of what really happens to that mind in an isolated environment when it's just scrolling content and I mean uh, it gets into that a vicious cycle, I would say. So what would you really like to put forth and maybe put forth a concerning statement from your end?
Well, one of the things I like to talk about is the dopamine response. We all know that dopamine is a pleasure element. So like you and I are having an awesome conversation. And so that would hit us on a dopamine scale that just being able to talk to someone. So let's say if there's a scale 1 to 10, where you and I are on a 2. The first time a child is exposed to pornography or any digital thing, that dopamine scale can hit a 6 or a 7. And at an age, let's say 9, 10, 11, 12, they don't know what to do with that. It's
Mm.
like putting it on rocket fuel, a go-kart. I don't know, like a small little moped, and you put rocket fuel in it. They don't know how to control that. So that's where, and what I call when a kid is carrying that, we call it muting the mic or their optical pulse. And what I mean by optical pulse is, and using a nursing analogy, if I take your pulse, I know how your heart is beating. Optical pulse,
Uh-huh.
we make eye contact. You know that the mic has been muted. So that's one of our signs that kids are really struggling and they don't know what to do with that. They're like feeling guilt and shame. And you can go up to them like, hey, especially if you find something on their device, like, John, I saw this on your device tonight, and I know you may not know what to do with that, but how about tonight? Let's put the device aside. And then in the morning, you and I sit aside together. Let's develop a strategy how to navigate this. And I want to share with you why I believe this is a very damaging thing for you and give them you know, why a good sexuality within, I like to say, a fireplace where it's meant to be contained can be a beautiful thing, but outside the fireplace, it can be a wildfire. Those are things that I've seen on the front lines. And, you know, if I could share this, what really sparked a lot of this was having a coffee with a dad at a coffee shop, and his eyes are like bloodshot, and he feels like he did everything to help his son understand how to responsibly use this device. But his son got into a situation where he's now doing jail time. And the dad's like, where have I failed? And the conversation that the son had with his dad after he's in jail is like, Dad, if I knew how to talk to you about this, if I knew you were a safe space, I wouldn't be in the situation that I am in now. And really that's a catalyst for me putting this out there is I want to make a difference. I want us to lead and maybe not have young men or young women in this situation because you see the news stories just like I do where this happens on a daily basis.
Oh yeah, that's very important, and I'm glad that you brought this up. And look, we gotta understand if you talk about any kind of addiction, what it does is, and it gets exponentially harmful at that young age, is that it really messes up your dopamine system. Like it flatlines. And when I say flatlines, I mean imagine we're having a conversation. Let's say, like you said, right? It's on a two, and if we have to, I mean, it's so bad that it's actually, I mean, there's no age that would justify that flat line. You know what
Yeah,
I'm saying? Even
I
even
agree.
for a adult man, that is something that, I mean, happens, and you crave more of it. I mean, a perfect example could be that of fentanyl, which is of course banned, but that is what it does, right? I mean, you take some of it, and in that context, it could be any kind of addiction, not just digital addiction. So it's important. I mean, it just okay. So the way I would explain it to my
Mhm.
listeners is that, imagine, okay, I want to ask you a simple question, Doug. Why do
Okay.
you feel happy? Like, what makes you feel happy when you're happy? Like, if that question makes sense, what would be your answer?
No, absolutely. I mean, things that give me joy, like spending time with my children or being with my wife, those are natural things that give me happiness,
Yeah. Now
right?
let me just.
But I mean, like you're saying, but what's the feeling that I'm feeling? Well, I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm
So
that in touch with myself to figure that out.
yeah. So just to put that into perspectives, you will not feel happy because happiness is, I think, on a relative scale, right? For you to be happy, there should be moments where your dopamine is below that happy threshold. And so if you're not sad, or if you're not anxious, or if you're not in these other unhappy states most of your time, then you would not really feel the bliss, because your dopamine, let's say, and your um I would say, sorry, I your oxytocin levels, or whatever those
Mhm.
happy
Absolutely.
hormones are, right? They're always
Yeah.
all time high. And when that happens to a kid, a teenager, that becomes exponentially more dangerous, because in that case, the chances of them going into isolation is exponentially higher. And you would be strange to know what isolation does to people at that age, Doug, because obviously, as grown adult, you know that we can struggle a lot. And if you put that into perspective for a kid, that is where it becomes dangerous. So I want to lastly take this conversation to a more practical standpoint. So for the parents who
Okay.
are listening to this right now, I think pornography is one of those topics that fathers usually go quiet on because well, they don't really want to talk about it, either out of shame or because we
Sure.
know that maybe they don't know what to say either, right? Or because they are battling it themselves. So for the dad
Sure.
listening to this right now, who's realizing that their kid's son has likely been exposed or already struggling, so what's a non-shaming or non-panicked first conversation that would actually look like, if you could share?
Yeah. I mean, what you want to really do, and you could probably relate to this, is you want to really listen. So I would say it was tonight. I would just pause and just take a step back. But the first thing I would do is just show them that you're serious. And in this day and age, if I'm talking to someone and they put their phone down or they close a device or close a book and make eye contact, and then um, I think you can just ask the one real question is, without fixing it. What can I do for you? How can I help you? And then let them know, let them verbalize that, but you know what you're going to do. You need to align with them. And it's a no shame thing. As I mentioned earlier, your scars, many of us have struggled with this and many of us have victory over it, but our scars don't disqualify from this. This is actually, I don't know if you ever had a time where you're struggling with something and you've talked to somebody about it and you're like, dude, me too. I'm struggling with that also. And you're like, oh my gosh, it's not just me. And that's where the power of a present father can be. That's where being or even a mother, let's say there's homes where dads are not present. We're not behind here. Restoration is our specialty. And we can end the cycle with when we can just tell our kids, and it's in the book, but it doesn't have to be, it's even on my website. I have scripts of even how, if you don't know what to say, I have scripts of like what to say, like, hey, and to help you out with that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does, and I think that is really helpful and an important reminder for all the parents, because I think most parenting advice assumes one missed moment as failure. So what you're saying is really
Yeah.
honest, and I love what you're bringing to the table. So
Well, and yeah, and I think love really matters here, just loving them through it also. Sorry to interrupt.
yeah, no, that's I think that's true. That's a very grounded way, perhaps, to put that forth. Because yeah, I mean, after all, they carry a lot of traits from you. So obviously, loving them and showing that no matter what, you've got their back is something that ultimately would help them turn. I mean, help them be a better person. So, Doug, and I think there are a lot of parenting advices here and there, especially in this digital heavy age. So I would just want to ask one more question, and maybe then
Sure.
we can wrap this off. Is that for the parents, father specifically listening to this right now, who feels like he has failed, maybe as a father, okay, he has that shame or guilt, who knows something has been quietly, I mean, going on under his roof, and he didn't, maybe was not able to catch it in time because himself busy in work or whatever the scenario might be, right? What would you want him to hear right now in your words directly to him?
I love that question. And I've been kind of alluding to it through the whole thing because I know as a father, I feel behind a lot. And one of the things we have to do in this age of social media is not measure ourselves up against other people. We know the fathers that we want to be. So, one, just to kind of use a biblical term here, but just give yourself grace and realize that, you know, it's not lost. Now, there are going to be times where our children may be disconnected with us. But the thing is always be present. Give yourself some forgiveness. Give yourself grace. Stop measuring yourself against the dad that you were last week. Our restoration is our specialty. And the cycle can end. Just know that you can help end the cycle with yourself and take the opportunity to be the vanguard, to step up and direct your son or your daughter where they need to be. And I think that that's where the power is. I know it's oversimplified, but honestly, just being present and showing your kids, our kids want that. They desperately want that. Sometimes they may push back, but just to constantly be a present person. So don't be discouraged by your scars. And as I mentioned earlier, just be a responsible father. And what that means is just being present. You don't need to be perfect. All you got to do is be present. And the bar is lower than we think, and the impact is higher than you think. I love that to say that, but the bar is lower than we think it is, but our impact is higher because ultimately our kids just want a father that loves them unconditionally, but also understands where they're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, a boy doesn't need a perfect father either, right? He needs a present one.
Mm-mm.
What you said right now is absolutely, I mean, it's heartwarming. So, Doug, before we close out, I want to make sure that listeners can pick you up and, find you and also the Vanguard project, especially the fathers who needed this episode tonight. So, where should they go?
Yeah, the first thing I tell you to do is go to thevanguardproject.org. I mean, you can order the field manual on there, but also I have a lot of free resources. There's a link at the top that says resource kits, and it has many tools that you could use tonight before you even get a copy of the book, how you can talk, or today, how you can talk to your kids. And then the book's available on Amazon, The Vanguard Project. It's Kindle. We've got an audiobook being created right now. So really my passion is that I just want to reframe the narrative. And so, yeah, I really appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, no, I think the pleasure's mine because this is something that I believe a lot of parents need to hear specifically because, well, we're living in such a digital age, and I think yeah, we pretty much I think made it clear of what good and what good parenting looks like, right? Which is just being present. So I think before we close out, here's what I'm carrying with me from this conversation, and of course, I would want the fathers today, the parents today, to maybe carry forth is that the screen is not really the enemy. It's the shame or the guilt that creeps up once the silence is spilled.